thank you for the honor of being here and the privilege of speaking to you all. You'll have to excuse my voice. It's beginning to go on me. I've been doing a lot of speaking, and actually this evening we fly out to Taiwan, where I've got meetings for the next 4 days in the city of Taipei. So a lot of travel ahead, but somehow last night after the meeting, I think my voice began to get affected. I'll be all right. It may sound more painful than it is, but so long as you can follow me, I will be quite happy. What a distinguished privilege you've given to me to be in your country and to be in this city. We finished 2 days in the beautiful city of Cluj, had the privilege of addressing 2 audiences there and seeing a wonderful response, especially of the youth. To see young people so eager and so attentive and listening to a difficult theme on the problem of pain and the problem of suffering. You normally think of that theme as that which strikes people in their middle years or in their senior years. But to have young people engaging on a subject like this tells you that they are aware that the world is not a happy place, that all kinds of things are happening. I want to trace for you 2 or 3 quotations that I think will put it in perspective. They may be tough quotations to follow, but I know even through a second language you will get the gist and the heart of what it is that is being said. Aldous Huxley was a humanist. He had no belief in God. And yet Huxley, writing in his book Ends and Means in 1946, said this, "We are living today not in the delicious intoxication of the early successes of science, rather in the grisly morning after, where it has become quite apparent that what science may have actually done is to introduce us to improved means in order to obtain hitherto unimproved or rather deteriorated ends. What science may have done is introduce us to improved means in order to obtain hitherto unimproved or rather deteriorated ends." Because science in its magisterium, a marvelous discipline, an extraordinary discipline that must be studied and understood, makes a cardinal mistake when it thinks of itself as an all-encompassing study that explains everything that there is to be explained in the universe. And the fact of the matter is, life is much more complex than just to be explained in scientific or in materialistic terms. And so Huxley warned us about that. It was the atheist Nietzsche who went before him and died in 1900 at the age of 56. He said this, he said, because God has died in the 19th century, he said 2 things will happen in the 20th century. Number 1, a universal madness will break out. And number 2, he said the 20th century will become the bloodiest century in history. He was right on both counts. Spent the last 13 years of his own life moving between insanity and sanity. And when you look at all the bloodshed of the 20th century, he was absolutely correct in what Acharya Vinoba Bhave, the Indian sage, said. In days of old, violence would be relative. In modern times, he said, violence would become absolute. It would become the only means that people will resort to in order to find an answer. Then writing in the 1970s, Malcolm Muggeridge, the journalist, who I think was the greatest English journalist of the 20th century, possibly a toss-up between him and G.K. Chesterton. Muggeridge said this, "It is difficult to resist the conclusion that 20th century man has decided to abolish himself. Tired of the struggle to be himself, he has created boredom out of his own affluence, impotence out of his own erotomania, vulnerability out of his own strength. He himself blows the trumpet that brings the walls of his own cities crashing down, until at last, having educated himself into imbecility, having drugged and polluted himself into stupefaction, he keels over a weary, battered old brontosaurus and becomes extinct." Powerful words. Of all that we accomplished, boredom out of our affluence, impotence out of our own erotomania, vulnerability out of our own strength, and we see the walls of our cities crashing down. Probably the simplest statement made by Charles Dickens in the opening line of A Tale of Two Cities, the most popular first line of any book, were the words by Dickens, "It was the best of times and it was the worst of times." It was the best of times and the worst of times. You are in a very unenviable situation in politics. You are expected to be magicians who can solve everything and please everybody and somehow still remain in your own distinctive convictions and moral values. The fact of the matter is, what you are doing is critical for the future all over the world. When I had the privilege of addressing the African presidents some years ago, one that even Kofi Annan himself chose to attend, I remember Muammar Gaddafi sitting in the front row, Mr. Annan on my right, and the African heads of state, most of the privileged ones on the head table. When I finished my talk to them, and I'm just an ordinary citizen, born and raised in India, went through Canada, and now living in the United States. I'm an ordinary person. But why this president said it to me, I do not know, and I won't name him. But as I was walking away from the lectern, he came next to me, put his arm in mine, and he said, "I want to tell you something, Mr. Zacharias. Our cumulative wisdom is unable to meet the daunting challenges of our time. Our cumulative wisdom is unable to meet the daunting challenges of our time." And of course, on the continent of Africa, when you think of the fiscal issues, when you think of the struggle with AIDS and all that is going on, I could understand what he was trying to say to me. The reports had been going through the microphones all morning, and I thought, what am I going to say into this kind of situation? About a month ago, I had the privilege of speaking at the Canadian Prayer Breakfast. It is the longest running annual event in Canada's gathering together for different causes. Marvelous to see the room overflowing and packed, and even leaders of the various parties were in attendance. I have a suspicion, deep inside their heart, they all know one thing, that somewhere ethics has to come into play. Somewhere wisdom has to take over. That all of our political theory and our knowledge needs deeper roots. So here's the illustration I would like to give to you. The political system is the trunk of the tree. The branches is how culture works itself out of political theory. The roots are in law. Law gives birth to politics, and politics interacts with law. My question is this: what gives the roots the ability to be held together? The roots have to be held by a soil. And my suggestion to you is, it is going to take a moral soil to hold the roots. Without a moral soil, the roots will have nothing to hold on to, and the trunk will emerge, and the branches will go into different directions, and we will see what we are seeing today. Very little moral reasoning is around. Even Stephen Hawking made a cardinal blunder in his book, The Moral Maze. I studied at Cambridge. I remember the days he was on his own search. And this brilliant physicist made a grave blunder in his book on page 5 when he said, philosophy is dead. Philosophy is dead. Theologians didn't have to respond to him. Church people didn't have to respond to him. The philosophy department from Cambridge University took him to task. And the chairman of the philosophy department said this: maybe the oracular Professor Hawking needs to realize that he's not kept up with our discipline as much as we have kept up with his. A powerful statement. So let me switch gears, give you an illustration, and build my argument here. Some years ago, I was doing an open forum at Ohio State University, one of the largest universities in the United States. While I was being driven there to the open forum, the gentleman driving me stopped outside a building, and he said to me, "This is America's first postmodern building. America's first postmodern building." So I said, "I understand postmodern philosophy. What is a postmodern building?" He said to me, "The architect said this: if man has no meaning and purpose in life, why should our buildings have any meaning and purpose?" So he decided to build a building. It's called the Wexner Center for the Arts, with no purpose. There are stairways going nowhere. There are rooms with odd shapes, and he built this building to commemorate postmodern philosophy. So the businessman driving me said, "What do you think?" I said, "I have only one question for him. Did he do the same thing with the foundation? Or did he have to have a purpose for the foundation?" City Hall would never have given him a permit if there weren't sufficient substructure strength to hold the infrastructure from which all other structures were going to flow. So, ladies and gentlemen, here's my proposal to you. What builds a strong foundation? What is it that the designer of this universe had in mind in giving us the foundation that we must build? The American writer put it in this way: "Once to every man a nation comes the moment to decide, in the strife of truth with falsehood, for the good or evil side. With each choice, God speaking to us offers then the bloom or blight. Then the man or nation chooses for the darkness or the light." And he is also the one who went on to say, "Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. But the scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadows, keeping watch over his own." I look at the very history of this nation. What has happened in the last 25 years? Who would have ever envisioned what you all now are privileged to direct? The scaffold that swayed the future, and truth, and then whatever was on the throne is gone. And now it's your turn to bring truth, beauty, goodness, and justice into a society of young people that is desperately looking for direction, aimlessly wandering in the desert of meaning and purpose in life. You see, university means to bring unity in diversity. That's why universities were made. And if you take one discipline and make it a monoversity of materialism, you have lost the very purpose of a university. It is intended to bring a confluence of all the disciplines that have a legitimate place of reference and verification. I believe God gives us 4 foundations to build my life on, to build a society on. Number 1 is the dimension of eternity. We cannot live just for the moment, just for the temporal. There is an eternal perspective we must have, a long-term perspective. I was in my 20s when I arrived in Canada in the 60s. My father worked for the Indian government. He was a deputy secretary in the Home Ministry, a close friend of Prime Minister Nehru and Indira Gandhi. My dad was a very influential man, and yet he saw very little future for India. So he bundled us kids up and told us to go to Canada and look to see if we could make a future out there. And then he followed after serving the Indian government for so many years. He saw what corruption was doing. He saw what abuse of power was doing. My dad couldn't face up to that kind of corruption. He was an honest man. He was a tough man. And he said the country will self-destruct if this bribery and this corruption continues to reign in our land. So we moved to Canada in 1966. I was 20 years old. In 1968 Christmas night, we had just gone to church. I was a new follower of Jesus Christ. We'd just gone to church. My father had not even begun his journey to faith in Christ. We sat in front of the television because he wanted us to watch it. He said, you're going to see something tonight the human eye has never seen. As the American astronauts were going around the dark side of the moon, and that silence was so ominous, and then after that silence emerged the first words. I'll never forget it. As a young 22-year-old then, the voice coming from tens of thousands of miles away. Think about it. The astronauts are seeing a sight no human eye had ever seen. They didn't go to a poet. They didn't go to a lyricist. They didn't go to a philosopher. They went to the opening words of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Only God was big enough in their minds to encompass the awe which was overflowing within them. May I suggest to you, if those words were used today from space, somebody would take the government to task and want to censor the astronauts for talking about God after science paid for the spaceship. That's the way it would be. One by one, challenges. There's a court case about to be raised in America where a military officer at a prayer breakfast talked about prayer in his personal life, and a foundation and a group of people. I know who this man is. I have spent a whole day with this man. He wants to ban the mention of God in the military. And he wants this man court-martialed and imprisoned for talking about prayer in his private life. I don't think it'll go anywhere, but this is the degree to which secularism has taken over. God is evicted and temporal reality becomes the supreme reality. There is no eternal truth. There are no eternal verities. I've had the privilege of being in the White House a few times speaking, and I won't name the president. But after I finished addressing the National Day of Prayer, serving as the prayer chair for that year, this president took my wife and me out as we were leaving, and he put his hand on my shoulder, and these were his very words. He said, Ravi, you may be the last one here for a long time to come. You may be the last one here speaking in the White House on prayer for a long time to come. The tension that is building in America between anti-theism and religious worldviews is a fearsome thing to watch happening. And yet, America has never been in more trouble. It has never seen more conflict racially, never been more uncertain economically, never been more without definitions on what it means to be human. All these definitions are gone because the eternal perspective has been lost. Eternity. That deals with existence. But then there is morality. That deals with essence. We must think of a moral framework in which we need to address these issues. Alexander Solzhenitsyn said this, the West is on the verge of collapse, created by its own hands. Between good and evil there is an irreconcilable contradiction. One cannot build one's national life without regard for this distinction. We, the oppressed people of Russia, watch with anguish the tragic enfeeblement of Europe. We offer you the experience of our suffering. We would like you to accept it without having to pay the monstrous price of death and slavery that we have paid. What an enormous statement. In the 1980s, of all places, I was invited by the Center for Geopolitical Strategy in Moscow and the Lenin Military Academy to talk about the place for God in society. At the military academy, some of them were giving me the choke sign like this. I just turned my look in another direction and kept talking because the general who invited me was sitting to my right. Then the Center for Geopolitical Strategy, 8 stories above ground, 4 stories below ground. I'll never forget, the entire faculty was atheistic, the entire faculty, and they were hurling hostile questions at me. I gave them 2 illustrations of what happened under Joseph Stalin. How his last gesture before he died, what Svetlana said, he once upon a time was a seminary student, renounced his belief in God, and turned his back upon his own society. And do you realize He slaughtered 15 million of his own people, and they're listening to me in pin-drop silence. I said, the last gesture Stalin did was clench his fist towards the heavens one more time, head back on the pillow, and he was gone. I said, do you see the connection between his ideology and his behavior? There was a softening, a gradual softening. My wife said to me, I began to see the difference. And then they lined up to bid me goodbye. They kissed my wife's hand, and my colleague shook hands with him, and the chairman of the department of all of the studies there leaned forward and he whispered into my ear. He said, Dr. Zacharias, I believe what you have told us today to be the truth, but it's very difficult to change after 70 years of believing a lie. I believe what you've told us today to be the truth, but it's very difficult to change after 70 years of believing a lie. That was a crowning statement of a 3-hour interaction. The lie had so taken hold of the people's minds that they could not even have the courage to turn and follow to the truth. And here's what I want to say to you. Where do we get our morality from? How do we define morals? How do we define good and evil? And I just say this to you, if life is not sacred, there is no source of definition for good and evil. If life is not sacred, there is no source of definition for good and evil. The 10 Commandments can be summarized in one word, sacredness. My life is sacred. My family is sacred. My possessions are sacred. My time is sacred. My worship is sacred. And so is the right of my neighbor. You see, Moses gave 613 laws. David reduced it to 15. Isaiah reduced it to 11. Micah reduced it to 3, to do justice, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. And a man comes to Jesus and says, which is the greatest commandment? You know, Jesus could have reduced it to 1. He didn't. He reduced it to 2. He said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your soul and all your strength, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. He said, on these 2 commandments hang all of the laws and the prophets. Why did he say that? Because of the first, the second naturally follows. Without the first, the second is with its feet firmly planted in midair. My neighbor's right, my neighbor's privilege has to be guarded just as much as mine. It's a give and take in this world where an individual cannot have a monopoly. But you start with the fact that life is sacred. One quick comment, and I move to my final 2 thoughts very quickly. About 5 years ago, I was in Damascus, Syria. I've been there many times, and every time I arrive on the first day, I have to report to the chief of intelligence. I have a note waiting for me in the hotel or where I'm staying that I'm to meet with them. And you arrive and all of the generals are sitting there and all the fine foods, the baklava and coffee and all, which you're really not going to eat because it's not exactly a comfort zone for your digestion when you're being grilled by the intelligence department. But then he looked at me and he said this. He said, Mr. Zacharias, I want you to know just one warning. Don't get into the politics of the region. But you are very welcome here. We need you here. I said, sir, can I ask you one question? You know I never get involved in the politics of the region. Can you summarize for me, what do you think the region is facing right now? He was shocked. Here's what he said to me, and I quoted him when I came back to the US with his permission. He said this, I give this part of the world no more than 5 years and the whole place is going to explode. I said, really? He said, watch. No more than 5 years and this whole place is going to explode. Syria, Damascus, a beautiful city. It's a beautiful historic city, one of the oldest inhabited cities in the world. That wall. What are they doing to it now? Those who don't care are destroying what stones can tell you of the past. Look at what's happening in that part of the world. And this very man I'm talking to you about, some people walked into his office and gunned him down at point blank for raising a voice to protect the nation and protect the people. He was gone. You see, the whole issue of losing the value of your neighbor's life, I have no right to devalue it. I have no right to violate my neighbor's life. Morality gives you the essence of who you and I are. Eternity, existence, morality, essence. Thirdly and quickly, accountability, conscience. Conscience. I live 50% of my time on the road. I have a beautiful wife. My wife's from Canada. We have 3 children and 4 grandchildren. Our oldest grandson is about 3.5 years old. So we have very little grandchildren. And I'm away from them a lot. This is my calling. I don't always enjoy it. I wish I could be home more, but I have a calling before God to make a difference in this world, especially in the minds of our young people. I care about what's happening, and that's why I'm committed to it. And I say this to you, when I look at young people like that, look at children like that, and I'm alone on the road, I face temptations. I face temptations. The Bible says the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life, that's in the heart of man. And when you're alone in a hotel room, half your life, the temptations are there, they stalk you. And I have just made a commitment before God. I know that even if nobody else is watching, God is. That I will always be accountable to him. He watches me in the privacy of my own life. Remember the philosophical question? If a tree falls in the jungle with nobody there to hear it, does it make a noise? If a tree falls in the jungle with nobody there to hear it, does it make a noise? Somebody wrote these words. There was a young man who thought God must find it exceedingly odd that he sees that this tree continues to be when there's no one about in the quad. Young man, your astonishment is odd. I am always about in the quad, and that's why this tree will continue to be, since observed by yours faithfully, God. God watches over your life. God watches over my life. The one plea I would make to political leadership today is be a man and woman of integrity. Let your yea be yea and your nay be nay, and your private life be in keeping with the accountability before God. I spoke once on the problem of pleasure to the Atlanta Braves, Major League Baseball. They asked me to speak on the problem of pleasure. And so I stood up and said, you know, guys, I'm looking at you, big muscles, solidly built. I would fail the physical coming into this room. I can't see the ball that you guys can knock out. I've not even seen it coming before it's out of the park. You're brilliant at what you do. I can't talk to you about baseball. I said, but I want to talk to you about something I think I know as much, if not more, than most of you young guys. I know what it means to live life on the road, and that's what I want to talk to you about. They just sat back and they listened. When I was finished, they're normally supposed to go out and start running and exercising. They lined up. And one of the highest paid players of multiple millions a year came over to me and grabbed me so tight, strong guy. And he put his head on my shoulder and sobbed like a little boy. He said, Ravi, I have more money than I ever thought I would have, but I have less things of real value in my life than I once did. I wish I had heard this talk before I became a wealthy man. I've lost everything of real worth with my wife, my children, my family. I've lost my reputation. Accountability. We stand before God. So we've got eternity, existence, morality, essence, accountability, conscience, and lastly, charity, beneficence. It's a difficult world. I deal with counter perspectives all the time. And they say to me, son, you are becoming a speaker. I just want to give you one word of advice. There's no point giving a person a rose to smell once you have cut off their nose. There's no point giving a person a rose to smell once you have cut off their nose. He said, if you're presenting the sweet aroma of your Lord, don't cut off a person's nose in the process. Let them be able to receive what it is that you have to say. And in my line of work, I go into Muslim countries, I go into Hindu countries, Buddhist countries, atheistic countries. I've covered so many of the major universities of the world, and I'll tell you what, I have never left a place but that even those who may have disagreed with me will come and embrace me and say, thank you for being here. I have no desire of making enemies. This is not an easy calling, but I have a desire to let intelligent ideas be interacted upon so that people can say, let's talk about this. And in the end, I believe truth will win out. And I will close these two statements. Winston Churchill made this comment. He said, truth is the most valuable thing in the world. It is so valuable that oftentimes it is surrounded by a bodyguard of lies. He was talking about military warfare. Natan Sharansky, political prisoner in the former Soviet Union, Justice Minister of Israel, went back and visited Lefortovo prison and asked the power authorities, can I go in there for just a few minutes to remember all that happened when you incarcerated me? He arrived, and his wife was about to go in with him, and Sharansky said, no, please stay out for a few minutes. I want to go in there. It is where I found myself for the first time. And he went into the prison, in the dungeon, came out with tears in his eyes, and asked for a wreath of flowers. They gave him the flowers. And he asked if he could go to the graveside of Andrei Sakharov, the Soviet physicist who had given to the Soviet Union the atomic bomb. He took the wreath and went and laid it and came back to the microphones and said, I want to say to you this. Mr. Sakharov said before he died, I always thought that the most powerful weapon in the world was the bomb. He said, I've changed my mind. The most powerful weapon in the world is not the bomb. The most powerful weapon in the world is the truth. The most valuable thing, the most powerful thing is the truth. And so I say to you, eternity, morality, accountability, charity, these are the truths in which God has designed our lives. And I will assure you, I'll be praying for your nation. I love the people of this land, and I'm honored to be here. And I pray your best and your greatest days are ahead. Look at this building. Spectacular art. Genius. What happens when the same genius is put towards a peaceful existence for our people and giving them the freedom and the privilege of self-determination with truth ever in the pursuit for your culture and mine. May God richly bless you, and thank you so much for giving me a hearing. Senator Benoni, my honor, sir. I'm honored to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you.